It's a stunning admission by AstraZeneca, and this admission has taken place in a UK court, that its COVID vaccination, the kind of vaccine that AstraZeneca has put out, can cause rare side effects, and that includes blood clots. And this has sparked a huge row, as one would imagine. It's probably the first time that such an admission has been made legally. And in the United Kingdom, there are families of dozens of patients who are demanding compensation that run into millions of pounds. So what's the indemnity clause? And should recipients in India get a health checkup done? Let's get perspective on this. For that, Dr Pratit Samdani, the internal physician and intensivist, joining us, along with Desh Ratan Nigam, senior lawyer in the Supreme Court. Great to have you, gentlemen. Dr Samdani, let me begin by asking you, during the height of this pandemic, several medical practitioners have vouched strongly for vaccination. Some believe that India should have opened its doors to other international vaccines earlier. The booster shot initiative of the government, that was welcomed as well. And today, when you as a doctor digest news of AstraZeneca admitting that its COVID vaccine could cause blood clotting and cause what is being called TTS, thrombosis, thrombocytopenia syndrome, that can cause death, how do you react?
Vikram, let me just begin. Thank you very much, firstly, for having me on the show. Let me tell you, we're here today to talk, discuss, listen, because we are alive. And I strongly believe we are alive because of the vaccine shots we've taken. There are about 250,000 people who've actually expired, probably because of not taking any kind of vaccine. Now, we come to this admission of AstraZeneca, which does say that there are very few cases which have occurred, what we call as thrombosis and thrombocytopenia syndrome, also called as vaccine-induced immune thrombocytopenia with thrombosis, and or colloquially also called vaccine-induced prothrombotic immune thrombocytopenia. They are the same terminologies of the same disease. Now, this is a very, very, very rare side effect. The incidence is, the highest reported incidence was from Norway, where the incidence was about 1:26,000. And little data that we have globally, the incidence that we got in January, I think of 22 or 23, the incidence is 1:260 or 270,000. Having said that, it's unfortunate for the people who suffered. When you speak about that you should have allowed vaccines from abroad, every vaccine has a side effect. This could be a disastrous side effect. It is a ghastly side effect for those who suffer it, albeit the incidence is really low. I think we've done extremely well. We've fared well with the vaccines that we've got by the government, and I see no repentance, or I don't see any backlog to say that we should have got other vaccines. So I stand by it. It's a good admission, but we must read the lines that AstraZeneca said, that the incidence is very, very low. Most importantly, I think your next question before you ask any one of us, are we scared today because we've taken this vaccine before? Yes. The answer is no. No. This incidence occurs only within 4 to 42 days of you being vaccinated by I would say not only the AstraZeneca, but also the Janssen or Janssen vaccine, which have adenoviruses as the vector. So if you're talking about 2 years and 1 year and 3 years down the line, we are at no risk of thrombosis and thrombocytopenia because of this vaccine.
So you believe that as far as admission goes, this is a good admission to make, but every vaccine is going to have a side effect. The disastrousness of this one remains a case in point. How much of a case in point? Desh Ratan Nigam, at the height of the pandemic and the crying need for a vaccine that would serve as an antidote as such to the COVID-19 virus, there was clamor to demystify any myths about what was available on the Indian medical landscape. Covishield was definitely one of them. Now, after this admission coming through by the creators of the vaccine, from a legal standpoint, how do existing Indian laws protect the interests of those who've taken the vaccine?
Well, Vikram, let me make it very clear that compensation that we are talking about in this case, because whatever the damage has already been done. And although the incidence, the risk is very small as compared to the benefits arising out of the vaccine, we all know, given the situation, the vaccine was manufactured and released in the market in a hurried up manner because there was a requirement of that kind at that point of time, and the approval by WHO. And I'm sure, since the research today is showing that it takes 1 to 6 weeks to have that TTS symptoms, and therefore during the clinical trials which were going on, this issue must have come up. And the compensation is to, some kind of a recognition of a loss, suffering, or injury, and in order to compensate that person. In this particular case, though the risk is very small, the fact remains till 2023 May, AstraZeneca had not declared that this kind of disorder is arising, which results into brain strokes, heart strokes, and low platelet counts. And therefore, that hiding makes it very, damaging for them. And therefore, even in the Indian laws, the Constitution provides, justice. The word justice used in a preamble or otherwise,
Yes,
it covers all this. And it is under the law of torts that a private wrong has been done to a person. He has suffered injury, and he has to be compensated in a manner as if he is sent back to the original position, that he has not suffered anything.
correct.
So that is the position of law that we have in India. And if people can establish the correlation, and more so if the facts have been hidden by the AstraZeneca company and not disclosed in due course of time, so that remedial steps could have been taken, people could have gone to the medical hospitals and got themselves checked up.
Yes.
Then, and in this particular case, the examples that are coming out in the UK court clearly shows that till 2023, no such information was given to the people.
Right.
That's quite damaging for AstraZeneca. And
Yes.
here, and the law of compensation in India is quite tardy, actually.
Yes.
As compared to US or UK or European countries. In India, it does take time. It takes a lot of time, and even the amount of compensation is not as humongous as in the Western countries. Therefore, although these remedies are available under the law of torts and even otherwise, and the Constitution also under the provisions of justice that we
Yes.
talk about, and therefore
Yes.
we need to be very careful. And
Yes.
if anybody can establish and has reason
Yes.
to believe,
We'll
they
have
may
to wait and
file-
see whether that happens in India. But Dr. Samdani, by your own admission, this particular statement being made by AstraZeneca, you did say, is a good thing. But of course, it does also imply that some facts were not shared with those who are going to be administered the vaccine. Does it place the processes followed by the pharma industry at large under the scanner for the kind of research and testing that they put drugs and vaccines to before they put them out in the market? Or do you think the pandemic itself presented this unusual situation?
Vikram, as Mr. Nigam was saying, this was an emergency. It was an urgency. We needed vaccines. Vaccines have certainly saved more lives than they've killed people, the ones who've taken the vaccines. And I do agree that, one is to establish a direct correlationship, because there are lots of ifs and buts. You have criteria to establish TTS post-vaccination, which includes 4 to 40 days of the vaccination. You have evidence of venous arterial thrombosis. You have platelet counts of less than 150,000. You should have a test called a positive platelet factor 4, which should be there. And you should have a D-dimer test that is 4 times the upper limit of normal. Now, this can happen in several other conditions, including as trivial, maybe, if I were to say, as a recent adenovirus infection. Because if you see both the vaccine manufacturers who've actually got cases of TTS, the vectors have been adenovirus. So I think it is difficult for AstraZeneca to, prove that this is not a side effect. But I would just be careful to say that they should have admitted before. Well, if they had patients who have been reporting these things, they should have given a warning in the beginning that this could be a possible side effect. We are under investigation and we need more data to prove that this is the cause.
Nigam, in that case, where does the buck really stop? Is it with the company itself, or does it go beyond in a situation like we experienced in the pandemic where governments were involved at large?
Well, let me tell you, Vikram, that given the situation, the emergency situation at that point of time, everybody was in a hurry to provide some kind of a vaccine. And Government of India did develop a wonderful vaccine called Covaxin and brought it into the market in a very short span of time. However, the buck in this case, after clinical trials, because the symptoms start showing within 1 to 6 weeks, and if there was such kind of disorder symptoms coming up in the clinical trial, that should have been informed to the people at large. And that warning was not given in the first instance. And I'm sure since the symptoms come in between 1 to 6 weeks, there must have been incidences of such kind of disorder known to the manufacturers of the vaccine. Not having done so is very damaging, and therefore the buck stops with the manufacturing company. And especially doing so after 2-3 years is something which is quite damaging. Again, I repeat, and therefore that would decide whether a person is entitled for compensation or not. If you have not disclosed it despite knowing it, which means you've played with the life of people, then otherwise people would have had a choice whether to take it or not to take it, given the serious kind of a disorder. Although the incidences are very low, no doubt, as compared to the benefits
and
the risk.
they would be detected in a span of 1 to 6 weeks. But Dr. Samdani, can we go ahead with that? As the facts emerge, we're getting to know of the possibility of this, as low as it seems today, several months after the entire pandemic, after vaccine has been administered. Now, when you're talking about people who have taken the vaccine, what are the steps that they need to take as far as health checkups go? Is that something you suggest they should do?
Well, I think prevention is better than cure. So health checkup is certainly something that should be done mandatorily, especially above a specific age or if you have a particular risk factor. Having said that, usually no tests are advised before a vaccine is taken. Because the incidence of this syndrome is so low that if you were to by and large take a whole population to do a blood test and then decide about the vaccine, I think the exercise of taking the vaccine would be much, much, much more expensive than really the cost. So I don't think it's mandatory. But if you had an incidence of TTS or something like TSS or TTS, please make sure that you do until you have more studies to say either which ways. So yes, health checkup is good. It can detect a lot of other things. So suppose you had a health checkup and your platelets were 100,000, or you had a past history of some vascular stroke or vascular event, you would probably think a little more than one time to decide whether you want to take this vaccine.
Well, when scientific facts and data stumble out much later after the event, it does seem to inspire worry, and that's exactly what many people who have had the vaccine would be asking. We will keep tracking this admission that AstraZeneca has made in a UK court, and whether there are implications for the Indian pharma industry or not, whether there are larger implications for our systems, for the checks and balances that we have. All of that is in play right now. Dr. Samdani and Sir, Mr. Nigam, thank you very much for joining us, for your perspective
Thank you, Mr.
on India
Vikram.
Tonight. Pleasure having you with us.